Pilate took Jesus and he scourged him. And you can read over that very quickly as if that's not much of anything happening, but that's far from the truth. It was a tremendous thing, and it was called by the Romans. It was called the half death. It brought you about halfway to death. They would scourge you until you passed out. They revive you again, and they would continue the process over and over until they decided that if they did it again, you probably wouldn't come back. It wasn't just a whip; it had metal and bone that would have been tied to it, and it cut very deeply into the back and into the shoulder and into various body parts where it landed. And so it was a terrible, terrible thing. And I made the argument for you, the suggestion for you, if you really look at the context, Pilate didn't do this simply out of a desire to punish Jesus or anything like that. Really, I would suggest to you what he's trying to do is he's trying to satisfy the mob so he can let Jesus go. And so you bring this man who's broken, you just scourged him. Most people had never seen anything like this. You bring him out, you put a robe on him and say, here's your king. Well, they're not going to be content with that. But all of this while, what he's trying to do is he's trying to free Jesus. Now, you might say, where do you get that? Let's look at a few passages in Luke chapter 23. Luke 23, verse 16. Watch the words there. I will therefore chastise him and release him. That's verse 16. Verse 22, they keep crying out even after this, and he says, what evil has he done? I have found no reason for death in him. I will therefore chastise him and let him go. But they were insistent, demanding with a loud voice that he be crucified. Okay. In John chapter 19. So then Pilate took Jesus and scourged him. And the soldiers twisted a crown of thorns and put it up on his head. And they put on him a purple robe, and they said, Hail, King of the Jews! And they struck him with their hands. And Pilate then went out again and said to them, Behold, I am bringing him out to you, that you may know that I find no fault in him. And so they bring Jesus out. And he says, Behold the man, verse 5. What's he doing? Exactly what we said. He's trying to get them to be satisfied with what he's done, and they're going to cry out all the more. What is it that finally puts his Pilate over the edge? Well, let's look at two passages on that. Matthew's account says this in Matthew chapter 27. Somebody read verses 24 and 25. Yeah. Okay. So the tumult's going to take place. That's one thing. But here's the real kicker in John chapter 19, verse 12. It reads this way. From then on, Pilate sought to release him, but the Jews cried out, saying, "If you let this man go, you are not Caesar's friend. Whoever makes himself a king speaks against Caesar." And when Pilate therefore heard the saying, he brought Jesus out, sit down in the judgment seat in the place called the Pavement. And you can read on down from there. They continue to cry out, and he delivers him up. But I would suggest to you that the defining point is, if you don't do what we say, you're not a friend of Caesar. Now, why would Pilate care about that? Well, Pilate works for Caesar, doesn't he? And history records the path between Jerusalem and Rome was very well worn by Jews constantly complaining about their governor, particularly Pilate. So he says, "Okay, I'm innocent. I wash my hands. Do with him what you will." Well, he's not innocent, but just kind of put yourself in his situation. What are you going to do with Jesus? Well, I'm going to stand up for him as much as I can, but when push comes to shove and it really starts affecting me personally, I'm done. There's a lot of people like that, isn't there? That they'll serve God when it's convenient, but if there's any cost, if there's any personal cost, they're not going to stand up and they're not going to stand firm. That's where Pilate is. And so that's kind of where we left off last time. Any thoughts there? If not, going down to back to Mark chapter 15, look at verses 16 and following, we'll pick up. Then the soldiers led him away into the hall called Praetorium, and they called together the whole garrison. And they clothed him with purple, and they twisted a crown of thorns, put it on his head, and they began to salute him, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they struck him on the head with a reed and spat on him. And bowing the knee, they worshipped him. And when they mocked him, they took the purple off him, put his own clothes on him, and led him out to crucify him. Okay. So the soldiers, the garrison's assembled. That is, let's get all the soldiers together we can. Garrisons differed in size, but depending upon the location and the time during the Roman Empire, but generally between 300 and 600 men. And they mock him. And the mockery that they're exhibiting here is they're mocking him as a king. They put on a purple robe, which is what a king would wear. They put a crown upon him, and they mock him and they humiliate him, just like they would with anybody else. There's nothing special about Jesus as far as what they're doing. They did this to everyone. Not everybody claimed to be a king. That's why you got the particularly mocking going on here, but they just had fun at the criminals' behalf before they were executed. Just another prisoner, another crucifixion. And they let him out to be crucified. All right. So let's read verses 31 through 32 and take this long section together. Then they compelled a certain man, Simon of Cyrenian, the father of Alexander and Rufus. That's verse 21. 21 through 32 is what we're going to read. As he was coming out of the country and passing by to bear his cross, and they brought him to the place called Golgotha, which is translated the place of the skull. Then they gave him wine mingled with myrrh to drink, and he did not take it. And when they crucified him, they divided his garments, casting lots for them to determine what every man should take. Now it was the third hour, and they crucified him, and the inscription of his accusation was written above, "The King of the Jews." With him, they also crucified two robbers, one on his right and the other on his left. So the scripture was fulfilled, which says that he was numbered with the transgressors. And those who passed by blasphemed him, wagging their heads and saying, "Aha, you who destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself and come down from the cross." Likewise, the chief priest, mocking among themselves with the scribes, said, "He saved others; he cannot save. He cannot save. He himself he cannot save. Let the Christ, the King of Israel, descend from the cross, that we may see and believe." And even those who were crucified with him reviled him. Okay. Simon the Cyrenian. He's conscripted to carry the cross. Uh, the cross that they would carry is not the entire cross, it's a cross beam. History bears this out. He would carry the cross beam, and John's account makes clear that Jesus first bare it, but now the responsibility goes to Simon the Cyrenian. He's conscripted. Cyrene is in North Africa. It's modern day, anybody know? Libya. It's Libya. The name of this man and his sons are mentioned. That must have had some significance to the people that would have read this. The only other place that we have this name, as you think about his sons, is in Romans chapter 16, verse 13. Maybe this is the same person. "Greet Rufus, chosen of the Lord, and his mother and mine." And so you've got a man named Rufus. The only two places Rufus is mentioned is here and in Romans 16. Is that a different Rufus? I suppose it could be. But I do find it interesting. It's the only two places that Rufus is mentioned. Golgotha simply means skull. The hill evidently looked kind of like a skull. Calvary is a Latin name. That's the name used in Luke's account. They mean the same thing. It's located outside the city walls. Wine mingled with myrrh is offered. It was a pain medication that was offered to the people on the cross. He refuses. In the original language, the tense indicates that he repetitively refused. He continued to refuse. You got the soldiers dividing his garments. Usually, you had 4 soldiers stationed or assigned to a condemned man. And the soldiers ordinarily took possession of the condemned man's garments. The typical Israelite would have the following garments. A couple of these are optional, obviously, but just starting with the basic garments, you have an outer garment, you have a belt, you have a 2-piece undergarment, and then as optional stuff, you have a turban, a purse, a rod, and of course, you're going to have sandals. And so they just commonly divided these things up. John tells us something, though, in John 19. What do you read, verses 23 and 24? Okay. Jesus has a seamless undergarment that he's wearing. Probably someone, um, either he provided it or someone provided this for him. What's significant about it? You know who wore a seamless undergarment? Josephus says who wore a seamless undergarment was a high priest. Could he be sending a message here? I think it's possible. So they get to the undergarment, and it's not in two parts the way it ordinarily is. It's seamless, and therefore they cast lots for it. The third hour, 9 a.m. John uses Book of John uses Roman time. The other accounts seem to use Jewish time. The third hour would be 9 a.m. There were two daily sacrifices offered, one in the morning, one in the evening. The first sacrifice that was offered was at 9 a.m. The second sacrifice that was offered of the daily sacrifices was at 3 p.m. That's interesting. He's put upon the cross at 9 a.m. When's he give up the ghost? 3 p.m. In verses 27 and 28, you find that he's not alone. There are three crosses. And Isaiah has mentioned that he would be numbered with the transgressors. That is, he's going to be treated like a common condemned criminal. He's being crucified not alone. He's being crucified with other people who are also being condemned. Three people on this occasion. On two of these crosses, men are dying for their own sins. That's why they're being put to death. Jesus is dying for our sins. Look to Isaiah 53. Read beginning in verse 4. Look at verse 4b, second part of verse 4. Yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. What we think of him when we looked upon the cross? Well, we looked at him as somebody who was rejected by God. But he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and by his stripes we are healed. All we, like sheep, having gone astray, we have turned every one to his own way. The Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. Verse 10, yet it pleased the Lord to bruise him. He has put him to grief. When you make his soul an offering for sin. Then he goes on to talk about him prolonging his days, which gets into the resurrection. But I want you to see that he is being put to death, not for himself, but for us. That's also what was foretold of in Daniel 9 and a host of other passages that we could look at, that this crucifixion was not for himself and his own sins. While he's on the cross, people are mocking. Onlookers are mocking. Verse 29. Then you got specifically the chief priests and the scribes mentioned, verses 31 and 32. And then you've got even those being crucified with him, verse 32b. Now, there's two ways to look at this. This either means at first both men that are upon crosses on each side of him, that one on each side, start the mocking. They're both mocking. And then one of them humbles himself and backs off and changes his attitude. I suppose that's possible. But both men are pictured as mocking in Matthew chapter 27, 44, and in Mark chapter 15, 32. It's also possible, though, that the term is being used as a figure of speech simply to make the point that even the criminals mocked. Not that both of them did, but he's describing various people there, and he talks about even those that were crucified with him did this. It's a possible figure of speech known as the synecdoche, where the part stands for the whole, and that is one of the criminals representing the group of criminals that are being crucified. We know that one of the criminals either changes his behavior from mocking to saying something different, or maybe he, like I said, maybe it's a figure of speech and he never actually joined in the mocking. It was just a one man. But we know that by looking at Luke's account. Look at Luke chapter 23. 39 and following. Then one of the criminals who was hanged blasphemed him, saying, "If you are the Christ, save yourself and us." But the other answering, rebuked him, saying, "Do you not even fear God, seeing you are under the same condemnation? And we indeed justly, for we have received the due reward of our deeds. This man has done nothing wrong." And then he said to Jesus, "Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus said, "Surely I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise." All right. Um, you've got either a change of heart in the man, he softened, and now he comes back to this conviction, which is possible, but I'm more inclined to believe that, as I look at it, this is a figure of speech when it talks about both of them joining in, or when it talks about the criminals doing this. It's a figure of speech saying the criminal class does this, and that's represented by one man doing it, and the other man's got a different kind of heart. Whatever the case, mockery. Can you imagine being so hard-hearted that you're dying upon a cross, but you're making fun of somebody else that's dying on a cross? That's pretty hard-hearted, isn't it? I mean, you're not going to last another day probably on this cross. The Jews couldn't let them stay up more than this day. That's why they typically would break the legs to speed it up. And so you're dying and you're mocking somebody else. Uh, it was common. I can't say for sure, but it was pretty common to do this to a person before they were crucified. And there's a lot of reasons for it. When you put a person like that upon a cross after he's gone through this, think of the insects, the birds. Think of what's attacking you after going through this as you're hanging on the cross and can't do anything about it. It's a sad scene. I think this is the appropriate place. We're going to take a little detour here and consider the thief on the cross argument. Whether it's a conversation with your friend or whether it's in a public debate, people who do not want to agree with baptism will come back invariably to this man and they say, "Well, you don't have to be baptized because the thief on the cross wouldn't." And it's a very, very common argument. And so I want to walk through that with you for a second. And I'm not going to start uh, where you might. I want to start at the most basics. They're assuming this man wasn't baptized. How do they know that? Do they know that? Does it say he was not baptized? Now, I hadn't got to New Testament baptism yet, but just think about, there was John's baptism. He may well have been baptized. As a matter of fact, many of that land went out to John and were baptized. As a matter of fact, it's used in a hyperbolic language as if everybody does. People were baptized all over the place under John. And so that's one thing I want you to keep in mind is they're making an assumption that this man hadn't been baptized. They don't know this. The man obviously knows something of Jesus' character by what he says. You think it might be possible he had been baptized and he just took a wrong path over the years, and now, as he's dying, he's coming back to where he ought to be? I think that's 100% possible. And so I won't let anybody off with the assumption the man wasn't baptized. There's no way you can prove he wasn't baptized. And your entire argument is based upon that. My entire argument's not based on that, but your entire argument, a person who wants to argue that way, is based upon that point there. Second, a lot of people turn to the thief on the cross and not to the conditions that Jesus gave other people while he was upon earth. What did he tell the rich young ruler to do? Go sell everything you got and come follow me. Why don't they go to that account? Well, they don't like that account. You need to understand that while Jesus was upon earth, he gave conditions for healings and conditions for forgiveness of sins, and those conditions varied from person to person. And he had the right to do that because he had power upon this earth to forgive sin, and he could forgive upon his own terms. He knew what was in man, and with the rich young ruler, he knew what his problem was, and it was money. So he made his terms. He didn't tell other people that. Thirdly, it needs to be kept in mind the new covenant had not gone into force yet. New Testament baptism did not exist yet. I know there's a baptism under John, and it was for the remission of sins. I understand that, based upon what had been set forth by the prophet. But that's not New Testament baptism. John's baptism looked forward to a coming Messiah. What does New Testament baptism do? It points back to Messiah, the death, the burial, and the resurrection of Christ. Had Jesus done those things yet? Nope, he had not. When does a covenant go in force? Hebrews chapter 9, verses 15 through 17. A covenant is not in force until the person dies, the testator dies. Jesus lived his entire life under the Old Testament. This man lived his entire life under the Old Testament. It's not until Jesus died and was resurrected that Great Commission baptism goes forth to all the world. So, you might think of an illustration. While I'm alive, I can do with my possessions what I want to, can I? If I want to give somebody something, I can give somebody something, and I can give that person my possessions on my terms, however I want to. But once I write a will and then die and my will goes into force, what is the standard? It's what the will says, right? Fourth, why in the world would somebody go to a case, an extreme case, with a man upon a cross who couldn't come down at this point if he wanted to, and use that extreme case to justify them for not being baptized when they could get up and do it if they wanted to? Difficult cases do not make good case law. You've got a situation here where you've got an extreme situation where the man can't do anything from that cross. And yet people that can do something want to go to that and say, I don't have to do anything because he didn't. You're not in the same situation as he was. Are you hanging from a cross? It is a very bad argument. And so those are some things I would suggest to you about the thief on the cross. I think it is an extremely common argument, and I think it's about the weakest argument that you can possibly make. Because you're going to an extreme case, you're dealing with a old covenant, and you don't even know whether the man's been baptized or not. And you're making your entire argument and jeopardizing your soul upon the fact he hadn't been baptized, and God's going to accept you because you haven't been. Bad argument. Any comments upon that? Right. They've either seen it or they've heard about it. Yeah. Yeah, it is, and I think we've got to be very careful about that mentality because people in mobs will do things they ordinarily would. When you go through Jesus' ministry, you're not going to find that most of the time most of the people rejected him. That's not what you're going to find. You're going to find masses following him. The religious leaders rejected him. They rejected him from the very beginning. They were jealous over him. They envious. And Pilate knows this. Mark chapter 15, verse 10. He knows it's envy. But now the people are joining in. It's just turned into a mob scene. Yeah, we'll just pile on now. Now that it's easy to pile on when things look bad for a person, whatever the situation, and so they just join in. Uh, pretty sick, pretty sick about a human condition that would do something like that. Yes, right. Yeah, that's exactly what he was talking about. They're misquoting him. They are repeating what they've heard. He didn't say he was going to destroy the temple. He simply said, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I'll raise it again." You're going to destroy it. I'm going to raise it. And he's talking about his body, but people are going to jump on whatever they want to. I mean, if you want to misunderstand, you're going to misunderstand. All right, let's look at verses 33 through 40. And there's some really interesting things that take place in this section. And when the 6th hour had come, there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour. In the 9th hour, Jesus cried with a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which is translated, my God, why have you forsaken me? And some of those who stood by, when they heard that, said, look, he is calling for Elijah. And someone ran and filled a sponge of sour wine, put it upon a reed, and offered it to him to drink. And he, saying, let him alone. Let's see if Elijah will come to take him down. And Jesus cried out with a loud voice, breathed his last. Then the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And so when the centurion who stood opposite him saw that he had cried out like this and breathed his last, he said, truly, this man was the Son of God, the Messiah. Therefore, also women looking on from afar, among whom were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James the Less, and Joseph, Salome, who also followed him and ministered to him when he was in Galilee, and many other women who came up with him to Jerusalem. Okay, obviously we're not going to finish this context, but I want to introduce it. I want to set forth some things for you to think about. You got darkness. The darkness lasts 3 hours. There is not a solar eclipse on the planet that lasts 3 hours. 3 hours. That's reminiscent, is it not, of the 3 days of darkness in the plague of the darkness upon Egypt? And what happened immediately after the plague of darkness upon Egypt? The ninth plague was darkness. The 10th was the death of the firstborn. What's about to die? What's about to happen? He's going to die, right? So you got darkness, you got death. It's reminiscent of Exodus. Moreover, it's the wrong time of year or wrong time of month for a solar eclipse to take place. Passover occurs at the time of the full moon, which means the moon's in the opposite part of the sky that you need to have a solar eclipse. My God, why have you forsaken me? It is a quotation from Psalm 22, verse 1. There are several different explanations of this. I'm going to give you the common explanation. I think the common explanation is wrong. I'll tell you that now. And then I'll walk through and tell you what I believe is going on. The common explanation is that Jesus is bearing the sins of the world. He could not look up, and God could not look upon such sinfulness. And they would cite Habakkuk chapter 1, verse 13. Therefore, God turned away from Jesus on the cross. And you hear that all the time. That's a common view. I don't think that's correct. I don't think it's correct for a couple of reasons. But if you look back to Psalm 22, the text that we're talking about, Psalm 22, verse 1 starts out, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? But what do you get as you move on down in the text? Psalm 22, verse 23, you've got this one saying, after all of this, you who fear the Lord, praise him. All you descendants of Jacob, glorify him and fear him, all you offspring of Israel, for he has not despised nor abhorred the affliction of the afflicted, nor has he hidden his face from him. But when he cried to him, he heard. He turned his face against him? Psalmist says no, didn't happen. So I don't think that's the explanation. So what is the explanation? We're about out of time. I'm going to have to leave you hanging. Another explanation that won't work. I'll give you the explanation that won't work, and then we'll come back next time to two possibilities, and I'll tell you what I believe is going on here. Some have suggested that Jesus thought that the cross meant failure, that he went to the cross and he failed. I don't see how that could possibly be true. Didn't Jesus know the plan? Yep. Didn't he predict the fact he was going to be taken by the Jews? He was going to be delivered to the Gentiles. They were going to crucify him, and then he was going to rise on the third day. Yeah, he said all of that. So it can't be that Jesus thought he was defeated at the cross. That's not the explanation either. That leaves two other explanations that I want to go over with you, and we'll look at next time. But I just want you to think through where you're at on what it means, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And not just repeat what you've heard, but what does it mean contextually? What's he doing? And we'll look at this next time, come back to it, try to finish this crucifixion scene. But as you know, crucifixion is not his end. And in 3 days, he will be resurrected, and he'll be victorious over the grave. And what does that mean? It means that we can have victory as well. All right, we'll close there.